came to a few of these classes.
That's Joseph Soloveitchik, Yosef Dov Soloveitchik.
Yeah, one of the great. So we need to. So we're on page 49, and there are some important introductions that need to be made.
Are you live?
I'm live. I just went live. So we have some important introductions that need to be made. And so he started talking about this doctrine of tzimtzum, of contraction. It's a Kabbalistic idea, but here he separates between the idea of tzimtzum as it exists in Kabbalistic literature and as it exists in his concept of the halachic man. I should say that it's very interesting because he sort of Kabbalah is very concerned with the spiritual realms, and his argument basically is Judaism is primarily concerned, halacha is primarily concerned with this world. And what's interesting is that he makes this distinction between the Kabbalistic model and the halachic model. His colleague, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, later then came along and put those two back together. It's a very interesting interplay. In other words, the particular issues with Kabbalah that Rabbi Soloveitchik raises is something that his colleague and friend actually dealt with. But at any rate, here, so we're going to talk about tzimtzum not so much from the Kabbalistic point of view as from the halachic point of view. In other words, to the Kabbalist who's concerned with the spiritual realms, and by the way, and that's one of the things that Hasidic thought concerns itself with, is basically the bringing of Kabbalistic ideas down to earth. As someone put it, Kabbalah makes God into the form of a man, and Chassidut makes man into the form of God. And we'll see what all this means. So at any rate, the mystery of tzimtzum, so chapter 9. So the mystery of tzimtzum, of contraction, which is basically the idea that God is capable of being present in the physical, that God is capable of caring about what you do, that what God most desires is that you do the mitzvot in time and space, as we've been discussing all along, does not touch upon the question of cosmogony. In other words, the Kabbalists use this doctrine of tzimtzum to explain how an infinite God can create a finite universe. In other words, the problem of the world being too small for God. The halachic use of the concept of tzimtzum, which is the same concept, that God is beyond infinite or finite and can be present in any way God chooses, is used to explain how God can care about the details of halacha. Unlike the Kabbalists and mutatis mutandis, which means to say the more things change and the more they stay the same, Philo, Plotinus, the Neoplatonists, and the Renaissance philosophers, the halacha does not concern itself with metaphysical mysteries, nor does it inquire that which is too remote for it regarding the creation of the universe. And we learned that in Tractate Chagiga on the Gemara, right? We don't ask what came before, what will be after, what is above, what is below. Rabbi Soloveitchik is referring to the Gemara that we've just been learning during the week. The law of halacha is a practical utilitarian one. Therefore, one should not compare the concept of tzimtzum in the halacha with the concept as it appears in mystical doctrine. There, in mystical doctrine, this idea expresses a metaphysical system that penetrates the hidden recesses of creation, that contemplates the foundation stones of the cosmos, being and nothingness, the beginning and the end. Here in the halacha, the concept of tzimtzum, though I have to make it clear, it's the same idea of tzimtzum, that God is beyond all description, including the infinite, and is present in the finite too. It's the same idea as the concept of tzimtzum in the Kabbalah, but it's not concerned. The Kabbalah wants to understand, how does such a great God create such a puny world? And the halachist wants to understand, how is this great God present in my life? And how is it possible that this great God is concerned with whether you put a piece of bread in the oven a minute before Shabbat or a minute after Shabbat? Here in the halacha, the concept of tzimtzum does not pertain to the secrets of creation and the divine chariot, but rather to laws and judgment. Therefore, halachic man's ontological outlook differs radically from that of the mystic.
What's that mean?
Ontological means a discussion of the source of things.
Onto.
Oh yeah.
Ontological.
Yeah.
So it's Greek for what?
It's Greek. It's Greek for tracing back things to the beginning, understanding. The
Like
beginning.
etymology or something.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's probably the same source.
Yeah. The different interpretations of the concept of tzimtzum gives rise to major divergencies in their respective ontological stances. In other words, his concern is, it depends where you start and what the problem is. Though again, this certainly applies to certain approaches to the Kabbalah. Interestingly enough, it's very different from the concept as it exists in Chassidut. So it's very interesting because Hasidism uses Kabbalistic terminology, but is not in itself Kabbalistic.
Brings down to earth. Is that what you're saying?
Not just brings down to earth. It's, in other words, the Kabbalist wants to know exactly how the spiritual worlds are arranged. Hasidism wants to know how that spiritual arrangement affects the way we live on this world, and how some of those divine energies might be useful in getting through your life day to day as a Jew, and also give you inspiration and meaning, so that the mitzvot are not merely dry.
Every time Bobby says Kaddish,
Yeah,
and I hear the word Dishmaya,
yeah,
I always add Dishmaya Va'ara,
yeah. There's two different versions of the Kaddish.
and that makes a big difference.
Why?
Dishmaya, heaven and earth, instead of just heaven.
That's why some versions of Kaddish
It doesn't
indeed have
sound
that.
like
Dishmaya
Kabbalah
Va'ara,
is
V'imru
involved.
Amen. Yeah.
It doesn't sound like Kabbalah is involved in Judaism per se, but Halakha uses it as a tool to maybe explain certain things. So
Right. So he's using a Kabbalistic concept to explain something that is not in the realm of the Kabbalah. But the point is, his discussion is talking about sort of, the pure Kabbalah, whereas Hasidism, makes many of the same points he does. Indeed, he quotes from Reb Shner Zalman of Liadi, from the Chabad tradition of Hasidism several times here, because the truth is, one of the features of Chabad is using Kabbalistic ideas to explain why the most important thing is what you do here on earth. So, and that's different from more mystical approaches that are more concerned with the various meditations and so on. With making yichudim by uniting the spiritual worlds, than they are about the down to earth issues. So he's talking here about a purely Kabbalistic approach. Like I say, it's interesting how Hasidism, as if it were, anticipates some of Rabbi Soloveitchik's points.
So how is it that so many, especially Chabad rabbis, that teach Kabbalah?
There's a simple reason.
How do they introduce it? It says, I'm here not to teach Kabbalah, but to bring the ideas of Kabbalah down to earth.
Well, that is typically what you do. You say, well, Kabbalah deals with various, deep and profound spiritual ideas. The purpose of learning them is to make you a better person and a better Jew. So in other words, we used Kabbalah because it's become a popular thing of late. It's a hook. But and Hasidism does discuss extensively Kabbalistic ideas, but it uses them
as a tool
to explain how important observing halacha is.
I have yet to hear a Chabad rabbi saying that in introduction to his Kabbalah classes.
Do I have Chabad smicha?
Yeah,
Okay.
you do. But
I have been doing it for 30 years.
The ones I heard.
Well, you should tell them that. You should tell them that. You should remind them what their role is. It's really very fascinating. No, because there is obviously this mystical bent within Judaism, and it's Kabbalah is part of the Torah. The question is, what is its what is its use? In other words, to actually journey through these worlds, you have to be on a high level to understand, for example, the idea of tzimtzum, which, as much as Rabbi Soloveitchik, I'm talking about a Halachic term, is originally a Kabbalistic idea, explains that this key idea that God is beyond infinite or finite is crucial to understanding why God cares if your tefillin are here or here.
This particular word, as you're talking, tzimtzum,
Yeah, it means contraction.
right? And the universe is constantly moving, contracting, and expanding. That's
Right. And
No.
the idea, but the idea over here is that the infinite being of the Ein Sof, of God's essence that can't even be described, is condensed into the Torah and into the world. In other words, God is infinite, yet God has created the whole universe, which itself is a contraction of God's being.
Well, in the physical sense, like if you talk to astronomers and they can see the universe contracts and expands and it makes stars and it
Right. But
of,
the point over here is that the entire universe and all its cycles, for God, the entire universe is insignificant because it's in the end the universe is finite.
right.
And there's a finite number of universes, no matter how many they are.
I don't know what you mean by finite.
It's limited.
Number.
It's limited.
It's limited.
There's a certain number of
But it
stars.
keeps on expanding.
Yeah, but it's expanding in space.
Yeah,
Space is expanding, but beyond space, there's nothing.
right.
Okay, so it's limited.
Expanding into an empty space.
Right. So no, it's not empty space. That's the
It
thing.
creates space.
Right,
No.
because there's a space-time beyond space. There is nothing. There's absolute nothing. Not space, not time. Zilch. Zitzeritos. And the point is that is therefore limited. So to God, who is truly infinite,
So what
our entire universe and all the universes are like a drop in an infinite sea.
I
So
think
when
we
you
should
was-
get back to the Halachic.
Right. So his point now, so the idea of tzimtzum is contraction, that God's infinite being is nevertheless also capable of being present within the finite. Therefore, as if it were God can care what you had for breakfast this morning. Yes, lox, no rabbits, etc. That's the
But
concept.
the reason God cares is because he's part of all of us and he's
Right, but
he's linked to all of us.
yeah, but the point is that all of us are utterly nullified, like a single drop of water in the sea. In other words, from the perspective of infinity, we're insignificant because the finite is insignificant vis-a-vis the infinite.
I don't think it's like water. I think it's like an internet connection.
That's
No.
fine, but in the end, God is infinite, and therefore the
Okay.
finite has no weight to him, except that he chose. Because if you say God is forced to be infinite and cannot be present in the finite, that's a limitation. Okay. Okay. So let's continue. Being and nothingness, and that's what in Kabbalah it's dealing with, beginning and the end. Here in Halacha, the concept of tzimtzum does not pertain to the secrets of creation and the divine chariot, but rather to law and judgment. Therefore, Halachic man's ontological outlook, which ontology is specifically defined in the Oxford as the study of the nature of being, differs radically from that of the mystic. We're still on page 49. There are different interpretations of the concept of tzimtzum give rise to major divergences in their respective ontological stances. In other words, the mystic, both Jewish and non-Jewish, the mystic sees the existence of the world as a type of affront, heaven forbid, to God's glory. The cosmos, as if it were, impinges upon the infinity of the Creator. The Kabbalah senses and empathizes with the anguish of Shechinta B'Galusa, divine presence in exile, the glory of God that emerged from the hiddenness of infinity and became embodied in the creation of the cosmos, and that became contracted in it and by it, because God's, as you made the point with the internet connection, it's true. What the Kabbalah say is true, that God is present in everything, the existence of everything, but that's also a limitation to God's power.
The nefesh, the soul that God gave us, is part of is once like a network node. Each one has its own individual MAC address, and we're attached to the universe by our nefesh.
Right, but nevertheless, from the perspective of, shall we say, which doesn't exist, of a truly infinite server,
right.
This is this would be, it would seem, the creation of the world constitutes a type of waiver on the part of God of his own glory. For he is wholly separate from all the worlds, and no thought can grasp it. The cosmos is a revelation of God's grace. For his Shekhinah's divine presence clothes herself with worlds in order to give them life and impart existence to them. This is in the Pasach Eliyot, Tikunei Zohar, that Sfardim and Hasidim read before Shabbat Mincha. Here we have revealed an awesome, mysterious antinomy that speaks secrets and enigmas. On one hand, the glory of God, the most hidden, most primordial of all beings, separate, exalted, and lofty, negates all other independent existing reality, destroys and demolishes any world, be it revealed or concealed, that claims ontic status.
Ontic.
Which means to say,
the word ontic a
right,
lot. What does
yes,
it mean?
ontic means the nature of being. So, in other words, anything that claims to be real, he could just use the word real. In other words, that by nature, any world that claims to be real is not real, because the only thing that really exists is God's being, and obliterates worlds even before the very thought of creating them arose. On the other hand, the infinite glory contracted itself in the secrets of its unity, created the world, and clothed itself with the worlds. And from this perspective, everything is dependent upon him. The creation of the world took place on account of God's goodness. This is all the Kabbalistic approach. For he descended as if it were from absolute transcendence, domain of concrete existence, and inflicted a blemish upon his great and awesome glory that negates all reality before it was created. Because the perspective of God's infinity, nothing is significant. So to create something insignificant as if it were as a blemish on his glory. The act of creation is a descent for the glorious name of the Holy One, blessed be he, and the very attribute predicated of God, God of the world, inflicts a blemish, heaven forbid, on the idea of the infinite, for indeed there is no existence apart from him. The very grammatical form of Elikei Olam, the God of the world, is a self-contradiction, a veritable coincidence of opposites. The world cannot exist when it's directly traded to God. It'd be utterly nullified, like a single ray of light in the core of the sun. When God's splendid majesty stands forth and reveals, everything reverts to chaos and void, because existence only exists in the space where God withdraws and allows us to exist as a finite existence. Therefore, mystical doctrine, this is all the Kabbalistic approach. Therefore, mystical doctrine contemplates existence from a pessimistic perspective, and the ontological idea is not its ultimate end. It senses and empathizes the anguish of the Shekhinah divine presence and longs to rise up together with her from the narrow straits of reality and to cleave to the Most High God, who is exalted, lofty, and separate, all alone and not manifest any being. The yearning is to be one with God, to be extinguished. By the way, this was the era of Aaron's sons. They desired to be one with God and to be extinguished in God's greatness. This, according to mystical teaching, is the glorious and exalted astrological vision, meaning the vision of the end of days. And that day shall Lord be one, his name one. And every day the mystic prays for the fulfillment of the aspiration as he relates before the performance of a commandment. I am ready and prepared to carry out the commandment of my Creator for the sake of uniting the Holy One, blessed be he, e.g., thank you, Bob. Thank you very much. With his Shekhinah, with his divine presence.
I don't know how that went over the internet. Thank you, Bob.
What? Oh, what's wrong with saying thank you? And I'm going to say a bracha on the internet too. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol niyeh b'dvarei.
Amen.
Amen.
That's no big deal.
So
I'm not an angel. I drink coffee.
So to a practicing traditional Jew, Kabbalistic in Kabbalistic terms, how do you divorce yourself from the idea that Kabbalah is kind of like horoscopal or
No, it isn't.
Well, to some people, they roll their eyes and they think it's.
Well, yeah. Well,
they think it's
that's
focused
because
on tea leaves and things like
that's
that.
because it was popularized by ignoramai.
Okay.
It became like it became like It became like a means of, improving your golf game and so on. The problem is that, there was this rabbi who was the student of a significant Kabbalist in Jerusalem, except all the other students of Rabbi Ashlag claim that Berg never had anything to do with him, really. And he realized there was money to be made in creating sort of a Kabbalah cult, and he got some very big Hollywood stars to follow him. And as I was actually interviewed once on a religion show, a local cable show, and they asked me about this. I said, look, it's without a question, the whole purpose of Kabbalah is the whole goal of Kabbalah is to enable a person to transcend their physical limits and connect with the spiritual and see all physical desires and wealth and everything. Well, it's a little bit different from Buddhism. Buddhism, but
no, that's not. That's Hinduism.
Nirvana, I believe, is Buddhism. No, pretty sure it's Buddhism.
Hindu. Oh, but I'm thinking of Hindu word.
I'll look it up. Listen, I don't know. I'm not an expert in
You're
Eastern
right,
religions.
Right.
But my point is something else. My point is that if anything, the purpose of Kabbalah, and this is what he's saying, is to leave the limits and desires of the physical world and cleave to the spiritual. And these people who are running around yelling about Kabbalah are the worst example of people who revel in the lowest, ugliest, most how do you put it? Profane and despicable human appetites and so on. So yeah, I'm not impressed.
But they've killed the message.
Well, that's why. But that's what Joe was saying, that a lot of serious rabbis have begun giving Kabbalah classes to take the Kabbalah back from the fakers.
Okay.
Okay.
But not to exploit
Personally, knowing that Rabbi Soloveitchik's background, I would think that he would not recommend teaching Kabbalah as
No, not at all.
to just everybody.
So let me tell you something
extracurricular.
interesting.
Definitely.
So let me share something interesting with you. So no, he wouldn't recommend teaching Kabbalah to everyone, but here's the thing: he did not only quote the Tanya, he did teach Hasidut Chabad. He not only as he mentioned, he taught it. Pinchas Peli, I believe, wrote that so every summer they used to come up to he had a core of students from YU. I mean, the years when he was younger and active, who used to come up and spend the summer with him in Boston, in Brookline, actually, technically. And one year was like this, where Elul comes very early. Elul, the month of preparation for the high holidays, comes in mid-August. It came early that year. So they had been studying Talmud the whole time. So he says that Rabbi Soloveitchik looked at them and says, I see that you're studying the Torah, but I'm not sure the Torah has permeated you. So he told them to close their Gemarot, and he took out the Likutei Torah, which is Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi's discourses on Elul. In other words, the section of Likutei Torah dealing with Elul is like 30 big pages. And he studied that Chassidut, that part of Chabad Chassidism with his students for the rest of the time they were there. Yes. It's written down. It's in the Festschrift for him. What's the point? That he never taught Kabbalah, but Reb Shneur Zalman of Liadi's writings that use Kabbalah to explain the importance of making God a dwelling place in this world. In other words, it's very interesting. There are streams of Hasidism that are very far from Rabbi Soloveitchik, but there are streams of Hasidism that are very close to his approach.
So you're saying that he felt comfortable since the audience were Chabad?
They weren't Chabad. No, it was his YU students. There wasn't a Chabadnik for 10 miles.
Oh.
That's my point.
I thought he was.
No,
Audience was
no, but my point is that he never taught Kabbalah, and as you see, he's critical of the mystical approach. But he found the use of Kabbalistic ideas to explain the importance of halacha as very valuable, and that's something Reb Shneur Zalman does
in his original work.
Yeah, in the Tanya, and the whole Chabad is based on the Tanya. But my point is, you think of Chabad as a movement and so on. It's really a philosophical stream.
How is Tanya taught in Chabad? Starting at a very young age?
It's usually around Bar Mitzvah. To understand it
always
basically.
on one level, or they
No,
for different
no.
ages?
Look, I go through the book every year, and there's a daily study cycle, and every year I see it differently.
What do you mean you go through the book like reading Tillim?
No, there's 370 odd 300 if it's a leap year 380
Pages,
sections,
like a
less
good
than a
size-
page. It's not a big book.
like a good sized novel.
Yeah, but it's very deep. But the point being, and a matter of fact, Rabbi Soloveitchik was introduced to Tanya illicitly. So his father, Reb Moshe, I believe, was the Rav in a city that was basically, because it was in Belarus, it was half Mitnagdim and half Hasidim. But the Hasidim in Belarus and Lithuania are all Chabadniks. So his teacher, his Gemara teacher, was a Chabadnik, and he saw that Rabbi Yoshe Ber was an extremely bright little boy.
So Belarus is the Minsk.
Minsk area. Well, between basically everything from Vitebsk to Minsk. We're talking closer to
The
Vitebsk.
capital was Minsk.
Right, yeah. So there's a lot of jokes about going from Minsk to Pinsk. Yeah. But at any rate, what happens is that so his teacher saw how bright he was. So in addition to teaching him Gemara, he taught him Tanya on the sly until Rabbi Soloveitchik's mother caught them. But he already knew a lot of Tanya, and for the rest of his life, and obviously he studied it also. My point is that there are certain Hasidic streams that are much more concerned with right here and right now than they in terms of this whole halacha concept. So he uses the doctrine of tzimtzum to explain halacha, but not in the Kabbalistic, because the Kabbalistic approach, the mystic is concerned with, the Shekhinah is in exile and I want to return, I want to be one with the Shekhinah without limits and so on. And halacha is concerned with how do I get the Shekhinah down here, and how do I relate to the Shekhinah, not by leaving this world, but by digging myself deeper into this world with all the details of halacha. And I'm just saying that the Tanya and Likutei Torah take that same approach.
Why Olam Haba, you bring the world Olam Haba here.
Yeah, Vayered Hashem.
Through
but the Medrash, he quoted a Medrash.
You bring the Messianic age here.
Well, that's the point. What does the Rambam say? That there's no difference between the Messianic era and today, except for the political situation.
Yeah, except we'll never get all Jews putting on tefillin one day a week or Shabbos.
Who knows? Don't knock it till you tried it.
Right.
You never know. Okay, now, so the Holy One, blessed be He, wished to do good. This continues the Kabbalistic approach, and therefore created the world. What's really interesting is, as you see over here, it's very interesting because this was the Vilna Gaon was a great Kabbalist, but was very concerned about people floating around in mystical spaces, and that was his opposition to Hasidism. He was concerned that people would put the spiritual over the halachic. That is why his student, Rabbi Itcher Volozhiner, who was the son of Reb Chaim Volozhin, his students made peace with Hasidism, because he saw after 100 years that Hasidim were being very careful about halacha and were not abandoning it for some kind of Shabbatai Tzvi kind of thing. So the concerns went away, and that Tzemach Tzedek, who was the third Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Itcher Volozhin, basically made peace, and that was the end of the big fight between the Hasidim and the Mitnagdim.
The Soloveitchik's yeshiva is not Volozhin?
No, so I believe that Reb Chaim Brisker was in Volozhin, and when Volozhin was closed, he went off and made his own yeshiva.
Which was called?
I'm not sure. I'm not. Maybe it was in Brisk. But Volozhin is related to the Soloveitchiks.
Because it's amazing how many.
He's a descendant of the Volozhin.
Went to these yeshivas.
Sure.
But later were not Orthodox.
Yeah, well.
Like Bialik was a perfect example.
Was in Volozhin, and Shazar was in Tom Chetim. He was in Lubavitch. He was in the alternative, the big Lubavitch yeshiva.
So these two.
Shazar was a major figure in early Zion.
Traditional.
Two traditional, and and there was a tremendous.
Chabad have varying philosophies.
No, Lubavitch and Chabad are the same. Well.
Lubavitch and Chabad is the same.
Well, not exactly. The Tzemach Tzedek So there have been other Chabad Rebbes, but in other words, the Alter Rebbe had a student. Reb Shneur Zalman had a student named Reb Aaron of Strasheller. So that's the town he was from. So he made his own Chabad philosophy, and he was a Rebbe for a while. And because the Alter Rebbe's son and him deferred on interpretations of the Alter Rebbe, the usual thing. And then the Tzemach Tzedek had 7 sons, and 6 of them became Rebbes in different cities. One of them became the Rebbe in Lubavitch, and ultimately the other streams ended in the early 20th century. The Marash was number 4. Tzemach Tzedek was number 3. But after the previous Rebbe, the Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, who's the one who came to Springfield for a visit, there were no other Chabad Rebbe. So then Chabad and Lubavitch became synonymous.
In the 30s?
1930, yes. He stayed in Rabbi Silver's house.
That's probably where we have a lot of philosophical problems.
His daughter.
What?
His daughter was the mother
Of Barry Eisenstein, yeah. His daughter was married to a doctor.
We're still alive, right?
What?
We're still alive in David. We're recording still alive.
It's fine.
Yeah, that's all part of the show.
There's no one else on anyways.
Yeah, but you're recording it for
That's
posterity.
That's fine. This is an interesting topic.
Yeah.
The whole so basically, after they made peace, the Soloveitchiks, the Rebbitznik of Volozhin, and then the Soloveitchik family and the Lubavitch Rebbes were always very close. The Rebbe Rashab was close to Reb Chaim Brisker, Reb Chaim Soloveitchik. The Frierdiker Rebbe actually pushed very hard that Reb Moshe, his father, his father was in YU, and when Reb Moshe passed away, there was a question whether to make Reb Yosef Dov the Rosh Yeshiva there. The Frierdiker Rebbe knew some wealthy people who were connected with YU. He pushed very hard that the Rav should become the Rosh Yeshiva in YU.
You know what was
like the European,
interesting?
royal.
Yeah, pretty much.
You know what I find interesting is that in those days, the father could have been a Litvak, and the mother could have been a Chabad.
Well, Rav Kook was that way.
Exactly. Rav Kook.
No, because I'm telling you,
and
have
he
to.
was not the only one.
There are many. No,
There
I'm
are
trying to
many
tell you that
Jews.
after the Tzemach Tzedek and Rabbi Yitzchak of Volozhin met, yeah. After that point, the big fight between the Hasidim and Nagdim was over. Now people make jokes, there's different traditions, but the big fight was over because they understood, basically, as they put it, that Tzemach Tzedek understood that the Mitnagdim feared God, and the Mitnagdim understood that the Hasidim respected halacha, no problem.
Going out.
Anyways.
Are we all done?
So you know what? We got the Bissell sidetracked. That's okay. So
That was very good.
but a little bit of history is